This is EntreEd Talk, the podcast for entrepreneurial educators by entrepreneurial educators. We are your hosts, Toi Hirschman and
Amber Ravenscroft. This podcast is created by the National Consortium for Entrepreneurship Education, or EntreEd for short.
We are so excited to be reporting live from NACCE 2019 in Newport Beach, California, to bring you some awesome content.
We're featuring a few episodes that are part of a NACCE collaboration with EntreEd Talk, and we are doing them here from the conference on entrepreneurship explorations.
Welcome back to another episode of EntreEd Talk. We are so excited to be here today with Gordon Hester. He's a global business strategist and was a keynote speaker at NACCE 2019. We're going to let him tell you about his many hats. So welcome, Gordon.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me. And a little bit about my background. I've been in the business world now for roughly 35 years. Came out traditionally as an accountant working for Touche Ross, evolved there over my lifetime to working as a CEO in an entrepreneurial culture, built one of the largest direct selling distributorships in the world, over 10 billion in sales, over 100,000 active distributors in over 30 countries. So really successful in that side. These days, my world exists within direct selling and outside of it. So within direct selling, I'm very much involved as a transformation expert. I go in with companies and distributors and teams and leaders and help them transform the business model. The basic focus is how do we have consistent, healthy growth through transformation, and that can be complicated. It varies by company. And then on top of that, I have a world outside of it that might actually talk to your audience. I've been involved with the Wake Forest Entrepreneur Program for the last 5 years. I'm on their advisory council, was heavily involved in mentoring kids and the mentorship process that we built there. In addition to that, still do coaching. Forbes magazine invited me to be part of their coaches council, so I'm involved with that. So got a pretty broad world. Right now I have my consulting business that I'm scaling. I have a technology company that I own that I'm scaling. So much of my life is now just how do I keep up with growth and opportunities. So good problems to have.
That's incredible.
You need to take a breath after
that.
Yeah. So because of our audience is largely educators, can you tell us a little bit more about the Wake Forest opportunity and how you think, like what problems do you see in the education world when you're dealing with that, as far as like mindsets that students have or limiting beliefs that they might have?
Yeah, I think to me, the limiting beliefs start at the administrative level and work their way down from there. So I get involved with the Wake Forest program. My son got into the school. I was approached about being on the advisory council at the beginning of his freshman year. They were sort of a bit into their original, what I would call Wake Forest Entrepreneur 1.0. They had gotten a large grant from the Kauffman Foundation, had created an entrepreneur program, but the entrepreneur program, to me, wasn't really defined well. It wasn't built to be consistent with what I would expect at Wake Forest. You had good people, but they didn't have a background in entrepreneurism. There weren't people practicing and having good success in that space, more just academics, which sometimes that's what happens. So when I came in, I recognized what it was and began to look at how does it transform. At the same time, the college was, and they hired a guy from Cornell. His name is Dan Cohen. Dan built eLabs into the fourth largest entrepreneur program in the academic space. Okay. Had massive success, had situations where he had over $10 million worth of financing for people in his program. They scaled operations, and Wake brought him in to transform the program. So I locked arms with Dan, and I've been involved in that transformation from the beginning. And interesting enough, on the mindset, from the academic perspective, there's always these competing worlds. So in one context, you have this really strong, well-established liberal arts school stepping into the entrepreneurial world, which isn't necessarily the same as liberal arts. And how do these worlds come together, and how do you begin to work and keep unity and growth? And it was a challenge because I can remember the kind of concept of how the liberal arts saw entrepreneurism. But meanwhile, the school recognized, as most universities do, that entrepreneurism is something that's growing. And they're trying to figure out how to get positioned in that and how to differentiate their program. And it's interesting as I talk to different programs, how different they are, how they judge success, what they're trying to do. At Wake, it was about the final product. How do we really build these amazing startups out of the Wake Forest Entrepreneur Program, everything from ideation of the program to scaling operations, all things in between, understanding that for a lot of people, they're not necessarily going to own a business, but that mindset that happens and all the things that you learn with thinking, resourcefulness, that's the real gift because it translates into other things. And then on the kids side, on the student side, because I'm always in the trenches, I think that's where all the magic happens. These kids don't know what they don't know. As I mentioned in my lecture last night, I believe we're a program for compliance, not success. That's the mindset part. So a lot of it is reconstructing and transforming their mindset so that I can cure limiting beliefs or change programming of what exists. And it works that way, same way with the administration. It's always about creating that mindset that allows you to do anything. It's been an interesting journey in that respect. And I think everybody has the same challenges in all the universities I've been a part of.
Yeah, that's so true. And I like what you said about we're preparing these kids for compliance because that's exactly what we're doing. As they move up the ladder in school, it becomes more and more robotic, and the kids become more and more afraid to step outside of the comfort zone. And that's that vulnerability, that outside of the comfort zone is where those mindsets lie.
Yeah, and I think for schools to be successful, in my opinion, you have to get to the kids earlier. So I think the sooner you get to them, the older they get, the more you fight the process of how they're programmed. And that's where the limitations exist. But the other part of it is I think entrepreneur programs are eventually going to realize it's much easier to recruit somebody that has that mindset than to try to change and develop it.
Yeah.
Because I look at some kids that I've worked with that are, I would call really strong entrepreneurs, made millions of dollars when they were in high school or before. And the reality is if I took any of those kids and put it in an entrepreneur program, they're going to succeed because they already had what they needed to succeed. Where a lot of times what you inherit are students that love the idea of entrepreneurism. That's what I have in the direct selling. We have no shortage of people that want to have the dream of being an entrepreneur. They don't have the mindset. They don't have the work ethic. You got to reprogram them. You got to teach them all the business structures that are required, where people that come in have all that. So it's evolving. And I think that's one of the lessons people have to learn.
Yeah.
How do I get to them earlier? Because the other part of it is, let's use Wake as an example. If they had a program to reach out to kids 5 to 7, all of a sudden now they're programmed into not only learning, but to understanding this is a solution. And I think that's that journey process of how you build relationships and really build something special.
I mean, you're preaching to our choir. You're preaching to our choir because we truly believe that if we don't start integrating it down farther, that we will have a shortage of students that even are interested. The recruitment effort's going to be too difficult. And I actually I wrote down a lot of your quotes last night because I thought they were really impactful. But your quote, society teaches us conformity, not necessarily success, I think is so true. And I know Toi and I were just nodding, and that is something that community colleges are facing as a direct result of non-entrepreneurial mindsets taking place in K-12. And so, I mean, it's just a vast problem that we're trying to solve.
It is. And if you think this is what you inherit at a college level, then it becomes how do we develop this? And what does that look like? And how are we measuring the success of it? Because if the end result is we want everybody to have a scalable business venture, you're probably going to have a lot of disappointment because that's a small percentage of people that have the willingness and ability to do what's necessary to get there. But it doesn't mean that you can't develop and create a better product, something that comes out of an entrepreneur program that has more value to the marketplace. So kind of a good example would be my son, Connor. I got to him as soon as he got into Wake's business school. He had to earn his way in. And he called me up and he goes, this is a school built for creating middle management people. And I was like, well, did you sign a contract? That's what you had to do? Because I'm not really sure what the problem is. And he goes, no. So I brought him into my world. I gave him clients. I gave him projects. I mentored him. I taught him the right mindset. I taught him how to deal with problems that he wouldn't have had. I plugged him into the entrepreneur program at Wake. And he came out 3 years later, and he is nothing like any student I've ever seen because he got brought into the real world and got mentored and developed into something that he's now uniquely successful for a kid coming out of school. Mm-hmm. And of course, he is, the more he learned the value of entrepreneurism, the more it is ingrained in him. I'm not even sure he would be employable anymore because he loves the freedoms. He loves the creativity. He loves running cultures, like all those things that really matter in entrepreneurism.
I think that that's like you said, that's an issue with all colleges, because I went to college, I was plugged in to be a career engineer. No one ever told me I could be an entrepreneur.
The word wasn't even mentioned.
Never mentioned.
Yeah.
And I think that it is unrealistic to think that every single child that experiences entrepreneurship is going to become an entrepreneur, but they can have those mindsets no matter what. And we do our kids a disservice, especially going into whatever they're going to go into, because we don't even know what the jobs are going to be, by not giving them that it's empowering them, right?
Yeah.
It's empowering them to be successful no matter what they do. And
Yep.
Maybe it's appropriate for you, because you talked about the paths. Like there's 3 kind of paths that this can take. So maybe it's an appropriate time to bring those up, because I think it's really important. Like you said, not everyone's going to start a business, but there are a lot of ways that those mindsets can fit into these 3 paths that you talked about last night.
Yeah. So the 3 paths for me are more traditional culture. So kind of what I grew up believing, the idea that you find a place to work, you plug in there, you spend 40 years, you leave with a pension and a gold watch.
Gold watch.
And there's still, those cultures exist, and they tend to be very structured in their approach. Like you'll see dress codes and specific hours and just an immense amount of structure to protect culture. That was the world I started in at Touche Ross. I don't know how much it's evolved since then because I'm not a part of it. But I will tell you, people with an entrepreneur mindset can do well in there, because the thinking around it, when you teach resourcefulness and how to get along with people and how to build culture, seems to give them an advantage to move up. So there's value in a traditional culture. The more common path now for most people that have entrepreneurial mindset is to fall into an entrepreneurial culture. So if you look at startups or companies like Zappos or Amazon, Google, the idea behind these cultures is, how do we create a culture of entrepreneurship within the structure of a business? And you basically become a brand in their brand. And they give immense sense of freedoms. Like at Google, from what I recall, all their engineers, 25% of their day is do whatever you want. Mm-hmm. In traditional structure, they'd be like, why are you taking 5 minutes off? It is so much more control. But entrepreneurs value, there's studies on this. There's one with the MIT and the Federal Reserve. And what they value is autonomy, purpose, and growth. So your cultures have to work within that to support that. But what happens in an entrepreneurial culture is, not only do you get to practice entrepreneurism, not only do you get rewarded for that, but it helps you grow. It gives you more opportunity. It gives you those components that I just talked about. And it really sets you up to be able to have a bigger impact in the world. The third is own your own business. And for me, I've done them all. Mm-hmm. I worked at Touche Ross. I did 25 years as a CEO in an entrepreneurial culture, made millions and millions of dollars, because within that I had partnerships with the guy that owned it. We built businesses together within it. Now my path is, I'm looking to change things, looking to transform an industry. I really want to tackle entrepreneurs and and change things there. So I need to have my own path. I need to have my own culture. I don't want the controls of anything slowing me down. And to me, that's the beauty of having your own business, the ultimate freedom for me. I always tell people, like anything, if you ever talk to an entrepreneur, freedom is something they value. Mm-hmm. And they think entrepreneurism is a form of freedom, but the reality is it isn't always that way. So if I were to take a gig economy, Uber, some people say, we're an entrepreneur in Uber. Okay, it's a different model. It's very similar to direct selling. It's an independent contractor entrepreneurial model. But if you think you have freedom, I'll ask you this question. Can Uber make a decision and throw you out? And if they can, then you really don't have freedom. You don't necessarily, you're not an entrepreneur in the traditional sense of the word. So I wanted diversity. I wanted to be able to focus and diversify, knowing that no one person could take something away from me. Mm-hmm. Really, what I saw is the only person I should answer to is the consumer that I serve. And ultimately, if I put myself in a position to do that, then that's the ideal entrepreneurial model for me. What business you go to is secondary to that. I think that's where that mindset piece comes in.
I think that's so true. And I think it's, you talked last night too about, I liked when you talked about work ethic, because I think a lot of times when we are talking with students, young people, even teachers about this entrepreneur, it's like you said, there's never a shortage of people who think that it's a great idea to be an entrepreneur, but it's how do I really want to do this, to where does the rubber meet the road? And I think that a lot of people have read these, like the 4-hour work week and all these things, and I'm just going to get a website and I'm going to, and so would you mind talking a little bit to that about how it's still important to have this strong, and probably more important if you're an entrepreneur, to have this super strong work ethic?
Yeah, I think if you ever talk to a successful entrepreneur, not somebody pitching a book, they will tell you hard work is just foundational to being successful. I know lots of really successful entrepreneurs that have built massively big cultures. They would tell you in no uncertain terms, we live that. It controls our life in a sense. Most people would be like, oh, you're a workaholic. It's not a workaholic, it's a love of doing what we do. And to me, it's important to understand work ethic matters in everything. If you want to succeed, you have to be willing to work hard. What you hope to do over time is to work smart. And that to me is learning how to scale, learning how to know business structure. So I'll give you, for instance, I had one of the students at Wake. They had developed, well, a couple of them, they developed really cool applications. And they had patents and they did all the things to build it. And then it's like, okay, now what's your go-to-market strategy? And they're like, well, we're going to do this, this, and this, and this. And I'm like, very traditional in their thinking. And like, you realize how much money it takes to do all that. So how are you going to finance this? How are you going to go about scaling this? Because some of them will be like, I have this amazing product and we want to take it to retail and get it global. And we have $3,000 to do that. Okay, well, good luck. There's a reality to things. But yet, if you're like, maybe an alternative path to working smarter is to license it, to seek somebody else to do all the hard work that knows what they're doing, that this can be a better path. For me, all scalability of business is about working smarter. It doesn't change the fact that you still got to work hard to make it grow. You just learn to get more value at a time. And that's kind of a big part of entrepreneurism for me. It isn't about how much I get paid per hour. It's how much value can I bring to an hour. And if I learn to work smart that way, I influence or enhance all things impact, which is what the game's about at the end of the day.
I'm going to ask you a question. It's probably a little bit controversial, but I feel like with my generation, which is the millennial generation, and the emerging Gen Z, we often get this stigma that we're lazy and that we don't want to work. And I feel like that affects sometimes educators' perception of that. And so can you talk about like, because I believe that mission-driven work and impact will create strong work ethic, but how would you address that stigma at an educator perspective of how do you motivate students that you don't think have any work ethic?
Yeah, so I work with a lot of Gen Ys, not so many Gen Zs, except some of the young social influencers. And I think they have characteristics that are easy for people my age to judge, because you judge based on what you know. So my generation came out of that work hard 40-year traditional career path. And they look at these Gen Ys and they're like, they're not focused, they're all over the place, they're not hard workers. Mm-hmm. My experience has been the opposite. I find when they're focused and they're passionate, they'll work day and night. If they're not, they'll pivot really quickly. And that's something that's very different in the generations. My generation never pivoted. We just stayed the course no matter what. The kids today, they'll pivot on a dime. They're very agile, where my generation was very structured. So I think when you're in a structured environment like education, and you see this thing that is unstructured and agile and different than what you know, you judge it for something different than what it is. And I've had lots of companies and institutions like, these Gen Ys are bad for business. The reality is they're great for business, and the Gen Zs are even going to be better. You just don't know how to employ them correctly. And if you judge them, they'll just leave. They're not going to stick around and take it. So I think you got to learn how to work with these generations. Supposedly, we had a kid come into the DSA that is like a leader of the Gen Zs with going into culture. And it was amazing the stuff he said, because he's like doing talks all over. He's helping companies integrate the Gen Zs in. And the one thing he said, that the biggest difference between the Gen Zs and the Gen Ys is they truly have a love of mission and giving back and in societal impact. They're going to be the social entrepreneurs of the future. Mm-hmm. And now it's how do we get to them? How do we feed that process instead of my generation trying to pull them into what we know? So I think it's really just seeing what's going forward and learning to support the future leadership. For me personally, I love working with the younger generations because they're the future. And I feel like I understand them enough to support their journey, not tell them why they're wrong and try to push them into mine. And I think a lot of the older generations think that's more the path. We know you plug into our world, and it's like, no, they know too. You might want to evolve around what they're doing. If you want to have a future, if you think that the past always equals the future, then keep doing what you're doing. I suspect you're going to learn a very painful lesson over time that that's not the way it works. You always adjust to the demographics. The Gen Ys are now the largest workforce that there is. You're not going to change that. You have to adapt to it. The Gen Zs are next, and they're going to come in with different kinds of skills. You have to be able to adjust to that. At some point, if your generation is all 50 and 60-year-olds, 20 years from now, your generation, your company, your industry will not exist if you don't evolve. So I think it's a misunderstanding of what they are and a misunderstanding of how to utilize them properly to impact whatever you're trying to impact in your business.
I'm so glad that you said that because it's coming, Amber.
I know.
I'm so glad.
Here it comes. I was like, Toi, it probably is a lot to unpack here.
Did you tee her up or something?
Yeah, I did, essentially. I do it all the time.
Okay. Just keep me in control. So I'm so glad that you said that because the way you're framing it it was in terms of business, but the same exact issue surrounds education because we have these young people who teachers. I've heard them say it. Anyway, we can't handle these kids. They think they know more than us. And we have this huge disconnect because by and large, teachers and educators are looking at this like we've got to fix these. There's something wrong with these kids. We have to fix them and teach them the way that we've always been teaching. When we can't do that anymore, we can't give these kids information. They have every piece of information in the world in their pocket. So how do we break that with teachers? And I think probably the answer to it lies in leadership.
Yeah.
And I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about the importance of leadership because we know by going into schools that if the leadership isn't excited about making this culture change in the school, it's not going to happen. And I think it's a huge shift, but it's our mission. That's what we fight for every day. So you could talk a little bit about the importance of leadership in terms of business and in education.
So if you look at any culture, which I consider a university, a culture, it will always become a byproduct of the leadership. So a good leader has certain components of a DNA. One is they value innovation. Two is they see the past as a curse. They don't live in the past. They're always looking at how do we move forward? What adaptations? How do we become agile? They look at leadership as a responsibility. They bring in really good leaders. They give them ownership. When you start violating these principles, what you begin to do is to hold something in what I call comfort zone. It is what it is. It's all about protecting the institution and the culture. And they think this is the risk management path, not understanding it's the exact opposite you need to do. If you hold on to the past, you won't have a future. One of the examples was the condiff bird, I think, that she mentioned this morning. I love that example because it is true. While you're looking forward, you always have to look back. There are core values that matter. There is wisdom in all things. I think some of my generation doesn't understand that the younger generation has wisdom that we don't have. If you take the Gen Ys, first demographic group that I would argue was smarter than the generation before them. First internet, first group of full mobile. You look at what they know on social media, that was their generation that got built. There's no way I'm going to know more than them. They grew up with it. I didn't. So you have to respect that they have things to teach you. And if you don't respect that in leadership, they won't listen to the wisdom you have to offer them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the challenge. How do you merge these two worlds together so that there's unity and everybody's learning from everyone? Because if it's one way, if it's unilateral, if the leadership in place knows everything, I can promise you these people will go find another home. I don't really care whether it's an institution or a business culture.
Yeah.
So I think leadership ultimately drives everything. but our leadership is stuck. It's interesting. This morning I listened to the presentation on leadership, and it was a really good presentation about what I would call the foundational pieces of leadership. But if I took it one step farther and said, okay, well, that's great on concept. How do I integrate that into the world? How do I take leadership and build something amazing that's going to be a next generation company, our business culture that drives transformation? Nobody seems to want to talk about the architecture of execution. It's just all concept. And you start to wonder when you teach leadership concept, how many people leave that room and it's like, oh man, that's amazing. Now what do I do? And ultimately, part of what is taught in leadership that I don't agree with is it's all a you thing. You learn this, you evolve into this. In reality, it's not that. Leadership is a responsibility to serve their flock. And that means you can't be the issue. You have to help other people be the issue. And I find some of these concepts that are taught create almost like a narcissistic, self-centered, almost like a savior complex, like I have all answers. The reality is nobody does it. No great entrepreneur thinks that way. No great leader thinks that way, in my opinion.
We met with a group of students yesterday, and we asked about the leaders of the group, and they all kind of looked around like, oh, well, we all kind of lead the group.
Yeah. And it's such a different approach. If we were interviewing a group of adults, I guarantee you they'd point to one. But it wasn't like that with the students. They were like, well, we all kind of, it's a collaborative effort. And I really like that.
What's good about that is also bad. So I think any culture, a group of people coming together, collaboration and unity really matter. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, I can't have ownership that way. Somebody has to be in charge of outcomes. So if I've got a bunch of kids doing a sales pitch, who's in charge? Doesn't change the fact that everybody collaborates, but not everybody can be in charge. If two people are in charge, then nobody's in charge. Mm-hmm. This is what I mean by teaching like a scalable mindset, this idea of how important ownership is. I guarantee if I talk to those kids and I start talking about ownership, and this would be a foreign concept to them because it's not being taught, but it should be taught. But it is great. That generation, these younger generations are really big about collaboration. Mm-hmm. And I think that's super important to building anything.
I'm glad that you mentioned, it was actually a Sankofa bird, because I wrote down the same thing. Yes. Yeah. And it's the African proverb, it's not wrong to go back for that which you have forgotten. So it's this idea of like continuing to innovate, but also at the same time remaining true to some of the foundational principles that I really like that you brought that up, because that impacted me this morning too.
Yeah. And I think there are timeless principles mm-hmm. in business. For instance, I believe that building around the customer experience and customer journey is a timeless principle. The problem is if I do it the way I did it 10 years ago, with the world evolving with technology and data and all the different things come into it, I'm not going to be relevant in the marketplace. Yeah. So yes, I think you have to hold on to traditions, but you have to look at how are they being utilized to grow into the future. Yeah. So like a perfect example, one of the guys that I work with, build a business with, he built his business through classified ads, and he was really good, and he could get team members, he could get customers. But if you had to do it today, there are no classified ads. And if there are, they probably exist in places like ZipRecruiter and other platforms like right. that. So his model wouldn't work. The thinking is still there. What matters is still there. It's just how it's practiced is different. So it's all kind of evolving. I look at one of my big things as influence. I look at how I built influence growing up and how influence is built today. Yeah. If anything, the importance of influence, I believe it's a form of capital, has never been more important, but how you get it has completely changed. Social media has changed the dynamics of how it works. So I think you have to be able to evolve, but be true to principles that really matter.
That's so true, and it's so true in schools, because we're doing the same thing. We're saying that, here's what worked, but now it's not working. And the system is fundamentally broken. And it's all about that, okay, we keep doing the same thing. You're going to
insanity. That's what insanity is. Yeah.
And we're trying to make that shift of it. I think that innovation is happening in schools in pockets, but then probably primarily because of leadership, those pockets it's not becoming the culture. It's just, there's this one-off awesome science teacher doing these crazy things. Yeah. But that's not becoming part of the culture of the organization.
Yeah, culture is hard to evolve when things exist in silos and mm-hmm. there aren't communication among different facets of the culture. I run into that all the time when we're transforming things. It's like, well, I got a marketing department, doesn't even talk to the sales department.
Right. Yeah.
And nobody knows what anybody's doing. You have all this chaos. Everybody's doing their own thing with change. And the end result is you're kind of stuck in limbo. You have all this inefficiency of how this process works. So yeah, it's all kind of interesting the way it works.
It's funny because you have this great business side and you do education as well, but it's really interesting because that's exactly the problem in schools. The math, I go to math, I'm done with math. I go to science, I'm done with science. Those two teachers aren't even talking to each other. No, I mean, and that is such a big thing that we talk about the schools all the time. It's not rocket science, right? You do what the world is doing. You collaborate with each other and you can come up with so many great ideas for kids and put it all under an entrepreneurial umbrella, that makes sense and makes it relevant to them. But we operate in massive silos in education.
Yeah, it's in business too. It exists everywhere. And I think the bigger something gets, the more silos exist within it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's trying to breaking those trends. But I will tell you the hardest thing to break is the mindset of what created it. Because if you hold on to the same thinking that this is what has to happen and you don't kind of support what's necessary to truly be relevant in the marketplace, then you're going to have a limited result. I just see it all the time in just about everything I do.
Yeah. I think that I'm going to make like my new motto. Innovation cannot be done in isolation because we see that so often in our schools. And I liked what you said about like your customer discovery, because schools should not be viewing students as students. They should be viewing them as customers, because especially as we start integrating school choice, like charter schools are rising, private school, like you have to be marketing your school structure and viewing students as a customer. Like there's this thing called jobs to be done theory that any stakeholder hires a school system. So, I mean, I really liked that because I think from a school leadership perspective, be thinking about what you're actually selling as your product.
Yeah, and I think that's an important change that has to happen in education.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, what's the lens you look at all things through? To me, the lens is always the end consumer. In this case, it's the student. And if I'm a college and I were to ask a bunch of people that run them, what is this lens? What is the ultimate thing you're trying to create here? To me, the answer is easy. The highest valued person or student I can put into the marketplace. It isn't about them just being the best math student or the best physics person or the best person in religion. It's creating all this mindset and structure and skills that enables them to come out as a better and more valuable asset to the marketplace. And I don't think education was ever looked at that way. It's very isolated to specific degrees.
Mm-hmm.
And within that, they're very good. I mean, well, you can go to schools that do engineering. They do engineering really well.
Yeah.
But some of the other things that actually matter to value in the marketplace, they don't teach people how to get along with each other. They don't teach time management. They teach relationship building. All these things become really important. But what's evolving in schools is you're starting to see what they call life skills working into developing a better byproduct. And this is really important now because if you pay attention to what's going on in education, you got a lot of people coming out that are what they call underemployed now.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I looked this up the other day. Over 40% of the kids coming out of school are underemployed. Why is that? It's because ultimately we're not creating a product that changes that dynamic. And even worse, education's got expensive. And now these kids come out and it's like, oh my gosh, we can't use our degree and we got to pay all these bills? Like, are you kidding me?
Would you like me to? I could go on a tangent about student loans.
Yeah.
I'm not going to.
And you know what? I don't think it's about the student loan. I think it's about creating the most valuable product you have to fix that problem.
Yeah.
But I don't think education sees it that way. But they're going to be forced to see it that way in time.
We could talk to you for hours. I'm telling you.
I could sit here and talk to you guys.
Yeah.
This is kind of fun.
Yeah, we try to make it conversational, but I think we like to wrap it up with what tangible advice would you give, and probably to community colleges through this lens, on how to create these entrepreneurial movements? Like, what tangible advice would you give to educators, leadership, whatever audience you want to talk to?
So if I'm talking to an audience of people setting up entrepreneur programs, the first thing I always say is, what's the outcome and how are you going to measure the success of this? So I have one school that might say, we're going to measure the success by the byproduct of what we create. And so the bigger the success stories, the more success we're going to have. I have other people say, well, it's not that for us. For us, it's just about selling the concept of entrepreneurs and see how many students we can get into it. So I think a lot depends on the outcome. So I think you have to start there. What is it you're really trying to build, and how are you going to measure the success of it? From there, I think you have to go back in and say, if that's the outcome, are we doing it well? And where do we have to innovate and to create a new plan so that you can execute and build toward that? I think a lot of entrepreneur programs today have popped up because entrepreneurism is sexy. It is the new thing. But at the end of the day, it's really about the byproduct. It is really about what you're trying to create. So if you just think it's the new thing, it's the hula hoop of the day, then what's going to happen is you're going to create it and it's not going to work. Right? And you're going to waste a lot of time and money, and you're going to limit the result, which is ultimately what matters the most. So for me, it's really going there. And then the other big piece I would tell them is just remember it's easier to attract than build. If you really want to build something great, be clear about your outcomes, figure out how you're going to differentiate, because that's a huge part when there's so many of these programs. And then how do I get to the kids earlier to begin to build connection with them so that I attract already proven entrepreneurs instead of having to attract people that are so programmed with what society has and have to correct that from there. And then when you get in the program, I think it's staging it. So first is you have to create awareness. So all things ideation. So how do I ideate mindset? How do I ideate business process, products, so many components of it. This is to me teaching resourcefulness, design thinking, and critical thinking. From there, you have to teach customer discovery and validation. So if the customer matters, if you ideate something and the customer doesn't want it, then you have to go back and rebuild all that. If you get that right and you can monetize it, then that's when you scale. When everybody's preaching about scaling a business, because of course, when you ever watch Shark Tank, that's all they talk about, scale.
I watched it last night, actually, funny enough.
And that's all great, but how do you scale if you don't get the parts right before then? And most of these kids that come into college, even the younger entrepreneurs, that's where they struggle. They don't know how to scale. They don't know how to build culture. They don't know how to build critical mass. They don't have the mindset to leverage, to build ownership, all the things that I live with in my world. So I think you got to look at all these different components. But the one thing I did mention that I just want to expand on a little bit is differentiation. So I don't know how many entrepreneur programs there are in education today, but the more crowded it gets, the more important it is to differentiate yourself. Why you versus the other 10,000 choices that exist? Why would you stand out? Maybe it's the reputation of the school that you're with. Maybe it's the structure and the results that you've produced. Maybe it's that you have a new way of dealing with it. Like it's funny, I haven't seen one entrepreneur program talk about that our program is really designed strictly around entrepreneurial insight and mindset. We don't really care where you point it. We're going to create a better product in the marketplace. That would be a form of differentiation. Because I think what these schools have to realize is they're competing against more and more people. And some of these schools already understand the game. They're way ahead. So Dan Cohen at Wake, who I work with, he asked me a question. It was kind of a quiz, I think. Who do you think has the best success as an entrepreneur program? I'm like, wow, I never know. But I guess Harvard or Stanford? He goes, no, MIT.
That makes sense.
And I was like, really? I would have never even thought MIT was an entrepreneurial school. He goes, actually, they breed entrepreneurial people. They've created 44 public companies out of that school. They have over 10,000 mentors. And you take a look at the brain trust there, all that infrastructure behind it, the success of it, what those 10,000 mentors look like, and you start to realize, okay, these are the components of what it really takes to differentiate yourself. And every one of these colleges are competing against all these other colleges. So I think differentiation becomes a huge part of all things with entrepreneurism in the university structures.
Could you tell our audience where they might reach you if they want to reach out to you?
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm kind of all over the place these days, but I'll give you my private email. It's gordon@gordonhester.com. That's the easiest place to reach me. I'm very receptive that way. But of course, I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook and all the other platforms. My website is gordonhester.com. Love to hear from anybody. I do my best to engage when people reach out to me. I do all my own communication, which might be people might think strange for somebody my way, but I love to connect to people. And I think connection is about investing into the process of building relationships. I don't think you can always leverage that away. So I look forward to hearing anybody. If I can help you, reach out to me. If there's something I can do to add value, I'll do it.
Well, thank you so much. This has been amazing having you on today.
Thank you.
So I know our audience really, really appreciate it. So we appreciate you and hope maybe we can get you back sometime.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Awesome.
And congratulations on the job you're doing. I think being a platform for getting information out, generally serve to transform what exists today, is really important. So I think it's great what you're doing, and thank you for letting me be a part of it.
Thank you.